In the Black Range of New Mexico in 1879, a boy of about 4 ran through the dark with the band of Victorio. His grandmother carried him when his legs gave out. No one spoke. A single cry would bring the cavalry down on every soul in that canyon. The boy did not make a sound. His name was James Kaywaykla. The movies gave you war paint and war cries. They never showed you the child who already knew that silence was the first thing you learned because it was the first thing that could kill you. We are not going to the movies for this. We are going to the people who were there. To the words of Geronimo himself, dictated to a man named S.M. Barrett at Fort Sill in 1906. To James Kaywaykla, who was that child in the dark, who lived long enough to record everything he remembered with the historian Eve Ball. To the ethnographer Morris Opler, who sat with Chiricahua men and women in the 1930s and wrote down what they told him about how they were raised, before the last generation who remembered was gone. To Jason Betzinez, who fought alongside Geronimo and published his own account in 1959. What they described was not what the movies showed you. It was harder, stranger, and more deliberate than any Western ever put on screen. And the deeper you go into these sources, the more you realize the movies did not simplify the Apache story. They replaced it with something that never happened. The Chiricahua, the Mescalero, the Western Apache, and the other bands occupied a territory spanning present-day Arizona, New Mexico, and the mountains of northern Mexico. By the 1870s, they were caught in a region where local authorities had placed bounties on Apache scalps. The state of Chihuahua had been paying since 1837, 100 pesos for the scalp of a warrior, 50 for a woman, 25 for a child. A child born into that world was born into a system already designed to kill them. That is where these 20 truths begin. Number 20. The cradle board was not confinement. It was the first piece of survival equipment a child ever wore. Opler documented the construction of the tzal in careful detail. The frame was cut from specific woods: oak, walnut, or wild mulberry, chosen for strength and flexibility. A medicine person blessed the board before the child was placed inside. The amulets fastened to it were not decoration. Each one was chosen for that particular child, for protection against specific dangers the medicine person foresaw. A people who could be forced to run at any hour of the night needed their infant secured, silent, and portable in seconds. The European cradle sat in a room, in a house, in a town that was not going anywhere. The Apache cradle board went wherever the mother went, strapped to her back, because she might have to move before sunrise and never come back to that camp. That board was not swaddling. It was not comfort. It was the first equipment issued to a child born into a war that had no front lines and no safe ground. And if you have ever held a newborn and felt the weight of everything that might go wrong, you already understand why a medicine person blessed Indeh before the child went in. Number 19. No Apache child was ever struck, not once. The interviews Opler conducted confirmed it again and again across multiple informants and multiple bands. Chiricahua men and women told him that corporal punishment was essentially unknown among their people. Discipline came through story, through shame, and through the quiet judgment of relatives. A grandmother might say to a misbehaving child, "You are acting like a white person." That single sentence carried enough weight to correct the behavior on the spot. If a child still refused to listen, the relatives simply stopped speaking to them for a time. The silence of the people you loved was punishment enough, and stories did the rest. Opler recorded the tales grandmothers told about Coyote, the trickster figure who acted foolishly and paid for it every time. A child heard those stories and understood them as warnings. The lesson was never delivered with a fist. It was delivered with a voice by the fire, and it worked so thoroughly that Opler found no informant who could recall a child being beaten. Think about what that means. The civilization that called the Apache savages beat its children in schoolrooms with wooden paddles and leather straps. The Apache, who trained their children to survive ambush, starvation, and desert crossings on foot, never raised a hand to them. I will leave that contrast right where it sits. It does not need a lecture. Number 18. A name was not a label given at birth. It was earned, and it could change with the life. Opler documented naming practices across the Chiricahua bands in detail. A first name might come from a physical trait noticed at birth or from an event surrounding the delivery. But names shifted as the person grew, as their character revealed itself, as their actions accumulated across the years. The childhood name of Geronimo was Kaywaykla, meaning one who yawns. He became Geronimo only later, under circumstances that are still debated. The name may have come from Mexican soldiers calling out to Saint Jerome during later battles after Casquilla in 1851, the day Kaywaykla lost his mother, his wife, and his 3 children to a Mexican attack on their camp. After that day, the man who yawned was gone. The man who replaced him carried a different name and a different purpose. The principle underneath was constant across all the bands. You did not simply receive an identity and carry it unchanged to the grave. You accumulated one through action and reputation. A name among the Apache was evidence of a life lived, not a tag assigned at the start of it. And names carried weight. To speak the name of the dead was forbidden among many bands. A name was not just identity, it was presence. And when a person was gone, the name went with them. Number 17. The real authority over how a child was raised did not belong to the war chief. It belonged to the grandmother. The Apache were matrilineal and matrilocal. A man married into the family camp of his wife. He moved to her ground. The maternal grandmother often had more daily influence over a child than the father ever did. The grandmother of Kaywaykla, Dilth Clayhen, is the clearest example in the entire historical record. She carried the old knowledge. She made decisions about the safety and training of the child. Even during the running flight from the cavalry through the Black Range, her authority was treated as absolute by the warriors around her. No one questioned it, not even in the worst hours of the flight, when every second mattered and every decision could mean the death of the band. Hollywood put the war chief at the center of every Apache story. The real center of Apache life was a grandmother sitting by a fire, deciding what the child needed to learn next. That is not what any movie ever showed you. Remember, we are building toward the most brutal truth on this list. And I promise you, the answer is not what you expect. Number 16. Children bathed in freezing water before dawn, even in the dead of winter, even when ice lined the edges of the stream. Opler and Betsinez both confirmed this independently, from different bands, decades apart. Children were roused before sunrise and sent to bathe in whatever cold water was available. Stream, river, snow runoff running down from the higher elevations into pools where the rocks were still cold from the night. It did not matter what the temperature was. This was not optional. It was not punishment. It was not a test you could choose to skip. It was daily, year-round, no exceptions. The children ran from their blankets to the water in the dark and came back with their skin tight and their minds sharp, ready for whatever the day would demand. Betsinez remembered it as one of the earliest and most consistent rituals of his childhood. Today, the average American takes a hot shower, lasting about 8 minutes, and complains when the water heater runs low. An Apache child began every single day standing in water cold enough to stop your breath before the sun cleared the ridge as the first act of a training system so thorough it started before the child was fully awake. Number 15. Silence was the first skill taught before speech itself. A mother learned to quiet her infant instantly because a crying baby on the run from soldiers could reveal the position of the entire band and get every man, woman, and child killed. Older children were trained in hand signals and silent movement as a foundational skill before complex spoken language was even expected of them. Opler documented the hand signal vocabulary used on raids in careful detail. Children were expected to know every sign. Go back now to the boy in the Black Range. Kaywaykla, 4 years old, running through pitch darkness with soldiers behind him. He did not cry. He did not call out. He did not stumble and scream. Now you understand why. This was not stoicism or toughness performed for its own sake. This was survival doctrine, taught from the first breath, because the first sound a child made could be the last sound anyone in the band ever heard. The cavalry officers who chased the Apache through the mountains marveled at how entire bands of men, women, and children could vanish into rocky terrain without a trace. They were not vanishing. They were being silent. And the children had learned it first. Number 14. Running was not exercise. It was the core of the entire curriculum. Children ran daily over increasing distances in terrain that would break a grown man from the east inside of a mile. The autobiography of Geronimo names running as a central element of his upbringing. Opler documented the practice of running with a mouthful of water that could not be swallowed, training nasal breathing and mouth discipline at the same time. Some accounts describe children running uphill carrying loads of increasing weight as they grew stronger. And this single practice explains one of the most documented military facts of the Apache Wars. Apache warriors routinely covered 40 to 70 miles in a single day on foot, outpacing mounted cavalry columns carrying far less weight. The soldiers of General George Crook noted this with something close to disbelief in their field reports. The children who ran those morning miles on empty stomachs became the adults no army on earth could catch. The training did not begin when a boy announced he was ready to fight. It began the morning after he learned to walk. By the time the army met them on the field, it was already decades too late to match them on foot. Number 13. A child was deliberately made to go hungry. Opler documented deliberate food restriction as a planned, supervised element of the training. Children were periodically required to go without food, sometimes for a full day, sometimes longer. Adults watched. It was not neglect. It was curriculum. A child who panicked when hungry was a child who could not survive separation from the band. And in the Apache Wars, separation happened constantly. Families scattered during army attacks. Children were separated from mothers in the chaos of a cavalry charge at dawn. A child left alone who could not function without a meal, who could not find water in dry country, who could not keep moving on a stomach that had been empty since yesterday, was a child who died on the third day. And that was not a theory. During the Victorio War, during the campaigns against Geronimo, children were separated from their families by force. The ones who survived alone in the desert were the ones whose parents had trained them to endure exactly this. The training was not cruelty. It was the most honest preparation a parent could give a child whose world offered no guarantees that tomorrow would include food. Number 12. Every game an Apache child played was a war game. The documentation Opler compiled reads like a training manual with the margins torn off. Sling throwing contests measured accuracy and distance against a target. Hiding games sent children into rough, broken terrain where seekers had to find them by tracking, not by calling out. Wrestling built close combat instinct and taught a boy where his body was strong and where it was not. Horse racing built the bond between rider and animal that would save lives later on a night ride through hostile country. Rock-throwing games specifically trained the arm for the moment it would need to throw something heavier and sharper. There was no line between play and preparation. A boy throwing rocks at a stump and a boy training to fight were the same boy in the same hour. The European division between childhood and soldiering, drawn firmly and proudly, simply did not exist in the Apache world. By the time an Apache child stopped playing, he had already been training for combat for years without anyone ever using that word. The games were the training. The laughter was the classroom. The most brutal truth on this list is still ahead, and it may not belong to the people you think it does. Number 11. Girls trained as hard as boys, and some surpassed them. The name that survives above all others is Losyn, sister of the chief Victorio. Kaywaykla described her as a warrior who rode, fought, and conducted sacred ceremonies alongside the men. Kaywaykla said she had a gift for locating the enemy through prayer, placing her palms outward and turning slowly until they tingled, pointing toward the threat no one else could see. Beyond Losyn, Opler documented that girls routinely participated in the same physical training the boys endured: riding, running, endurance work across the same brutal terrain. Some women fought when the situation demanded it, and no one in the band treated it as unusual or exceptional. A woman who could ride and shoot was not a curiosity. She was a resource. In a people whose survival depended on every capable person contributing, the idea of keeping half your strength out of the fight because of their sex would have seemed like madness. Victorio himself is said to have called Losyn worth more than 10 warriors. Hollywood gave you the painted warrior and the silent woman standing somewhere in the background. The Apache gave you Losyn, who was both warrior and medicine woman at once, and who never needed a movie to prove what she was. Number 10. A child could identify dozens of wild plants and their uses before the age of 7. The sections Opler compiled on botanical knowledge are remarkable in their depth and precision. Children learned which plants would feed them, which would heal a wound, which would poison an enemy, and where each one grew by season across the different elevations of their territory. Mescal, the agave plant, required a complex process of pit roasting over several days that the women mastered and the children learned by watching and doing alongside them. Betsy Inez described specific plants gathered during flight from the Army, identified and prepared while the soldiers behind them were still close enough to hear. This was not nature study. It was not a lesson in a schoolroom with a grade at the end. The desert that looked empty to a soldier from Ohio held dozens of food sources that an Apache child could name and prepare and find by memory. Yucca fruit, prickly pear, juniper berries, walnuts cached in the high country, sunflower seeds ground into meal. A child separated from the band who could not eat from the land was already dead before the sun went down. The botanical knowledge was as urgent as the running, and it started just as early. Number 9. By the age of 8 or 9, a child was expected to survive completely alone. Think about what that means. By that age, a Chiricahua child was expected to make fire without any tools brought from camp, find water in terrain that looked dry and dead to a stranger, build emergency shelter from whatever the desert floor offered, navigate by terrain features and stars through country with no trails and no markers, and feed themselves from the land for as long as it took to find the band or the band found them. This was not aspiration or a hopeful goal. It was the minimum standard for any child in a society that could be attacked and scattered at any moment of any day. And it was not theoretical. It happened. Children were separated from bands during cavalry attacks and lived alone in the mountains for days before they were found or found their way back. Today, fewer than half of American children between 6 and 11 spend any time in unstructured outdoor play on a given day. An 8-year-old in the band of Cochise and an 8-year-old in any American town today occupy the same age. They do not occupy the same world. They do not even occupy the same idea of what a child is. Number 8. Apache children witnessed death and were not shielded from it. Kaywaykla saw dead and wounded men and women during the Victorio War before he was old enough to understand what a war even was. Betsinez remembered the aftermath of battles in vivid and physical detail, the smell of powder, the sounds that did not stop when the fighting did. Opler noted that children were present during the processing of game kills and were expected to understand death as a constant companion, not a distant abstraction kept behind closed doors. There was no such thing as age-appropriate. No one sent the children away. A child who froze at the sight of blood was a child who would freeze at the worst possible second when it mattered most. And here is where the word brutal in the title begins to shift. Was this cruelty? Or was this the most honest thing a parent could do for a child born into a world that was never going to look away? A child sheltered from death is a child unprepared for it. And on the Apache frontier, death did not send a warning. It came through the camp at dawn on horseback, and the child who could not keep moving through the aftermath was the child who did not survive the morning. Number 7. A boy did not simply join a raiding party. His first raid was a 4-part apprenticeship built on total servitude. Opler documented the novice complex in extraordinary detail. The first 4 raids of a young man were a formal initiation that could take more than a year to complete. He used a special ceremonial vocabulary on the trail. Dozens of common words were replaced by sacred warpath terms. Water, fire, horse, all had different names that could only be spoken during a raid. He performed every piece of camp labor. He gathered the wood. He built the fires. He cooked the food. He tended the horses through the night. He ate last. He slept least. He could not scratch his own skin with his fingernails. He had to use a wooden stick. He could not look back on the trail behind him. This was not hazing. It was the deliberate construction of absolute discipline under sustained pressure. A sustained test of whether the boy could erase his own comfort and his own pride completely before anyone trusted him with a weapon and the lives of the men beside him. Only after 4 successful raids did the community accept him as a warrior. The process could take more than a year. There were no shortcuts. Number 6. The sunrise ceremony tested a girl to her physical limits and then made her sacred. The puberty ceremony of the Chiricahua is the most elaborately documented ritual in all of Apache life, and it belonged entirely to the young woman. Over 4 days and 4 nights, the girl danced for hours without rest. A medicine woman guided her through every stage of the ceremony. She reenacted the story of Changing Woman, White-Painted Woman, the central figure in the Apache account of creation. She knelt until her body shook. She ran to the 4 sacred directions, each run carrying a different meaning. She was massaged and molded by the hands of older women, a practice believed to literally shape her body into its adult form. The entire community gathered around her, sang through the nights, and feasted in her honor. This was the single most important ceremony the Apache ever held, more complex and more honored than any war ritual. And it tells you exactly what they valued most, not the warrior, the woman who would carry the next generation forward. The culture the Army called primitive staged a 4-day ceremony to honor a girl becoming a woman. The culture that called itself civilized would later send those same girls to a boarding school and cut off their hair on the first day. Number 5. Captive children were fully adopted and became Apache in every way that mattered. There are documented cases of Mexican children and children from other tribal nations taken during raids and raised as full members of the band. Some became warriors respected by the men who had captured them. Some married into Apache families and raised Apache children of their own. Once adopted, no distinction was ever drawn between them and the children born into the band. They were given Apache names. They learned the language. They went through the same training. They were eligible for the same ceremonies. Betsinez himself carried mixed ancestry and never once described being treated as lesser for it. The boundary between Apache and outsider was not racial. It was not a question of blood or birth. It was belonging. A child raised inside the system, trained in the old way, tested in the old ceremonies, was Apache, regardless of where they came from. This single fact dismantles every racial category the United States Army and the federal government tried to impose on a people who defined themselves not by the color of their skin or the place of their birth, but by what you had endured, what you had learned, and whether the people around you claimed you as their own. Number 4. What you have been listening to is not a collection of harsh customs. It was the most sophisticated system for training children on the North American continent. Step back now and see the whole structure at once. Physical conditioning through cold water, daily distance running, and deliberate hunger. Cognitive training through plant identification, terrain navigation, silence under pressure, and sustained observation of the natural world. Social training through the novice complex, ceremonial roles, and discipline built on shame rather than violence. Spiritual formation through the sunrise ceremony, the blessings placed on the cradle board at birth, and the naming practices that tracked a life as it unfolded. Every element connected to every other element. No piece was random. No practice existed in isolation. What you have been hearing across this entire list is not 20 separate facts. It is a single system, deliberate, interlocking, tested across centuries, and designed by people who understood exactly what their children were going to face. No European power, no colonial schoolmaster, no army training program of that era produced anything that came close to the completeness of what the Apache built for a 6-year-old. And they built it without a single schoolhouse, without a single written manual, and without ever once striking a child. We are almost there now. 3 truths left, and each one tightens the screw. Number 3. The reservation dismantled that entire system in a single generation. San Carlos, established in 1872 in the low desert of east-central Arizona, is where it all fell apart. The agents who ran the reservation packed thousands of Apache from different bands onto barren, flat ground where the children could not run the old distances through the old terrain. The bands could not move with the seasons the way they had for centuries. Hunting was restricted or made impossible by boundaries drawn on a map. The plant knowledge the children had spent years learning became useless on ground that grew nothing they recognized. The entire training system required 2 things above all else: a specific landscape with mountains, water, and elevation, and the freedom to move across it. Both were taken away at the same moment. Geronimo broke out of San Carlos again and again. Those breakouts were many things, but among them they were a desperate attempt to return to the only world where Apache childhood still made any sense. The system that produced warriors who could outrun cavalry and survive alone in the open desert for weeks at a time was not defeated in battle. It was defeated by a fence and a ration line. Everything the grandmothers had built over centuries was taken apart not by a better idea, but by confinement. And the children born at San Carlos grew up in a world where the old training no longer had anywhere to go. Number 2. The boarding schools did not educate Apache children. They were designed to erase them. Carlisle Indian Industrial School, founded in 1879 by a former cavalry officer named Richard Henry Pratt, stands at the center of this truth. The words Pratt used survive in the record. Kill the Indian in him and save the man. Apache children, including children from the band of Geronimo himself, were among the very first sent to Carlisle. The photographs survive. They show the children on the day of arrival and again after the transformation. Hair cut to the scalp, uniforms issued to replace everything they had worn. Anglo names written on a chalkboard to replace the names their families had given them. Children were beaten for speaking their own language, the only language their grandmothers had taught them. Disease killed many who were too far from home and too broken in spirit to fight it off. The Carlisle Cemetery holds rows of small white stones marking the graves of Apache children who never came home. The culture that called Apache child-rearing savage took those children, stripped away their language, sheared their hair, dressed them in identical cloth, and buried the ones who did not survive in a cemetery 1,000 miles from the mountains where they were born. There is no need for outrage in the telling. The facts are the outrage. Number 1. The most brutal truth on this list does not belong to the Apache at all. Go back now to the boy in the Black Range. James Kaywaykla, 4 years old, running in the dark. He survived that night. He survived the war that followed. He grew old in a world that no longer looked like the one he was trained for. And he told his story to Eve Ball so that it would not disappear from the earth when he did. The training his grandmother gave him, the silence, the running, the endurance, the cold water before dawn, the hunger that taught him his own body could keep going when his mind said it could not. Every single practice on this list kept him alive through one of the most relentless military campaigns in American history. Every brutal truth you just heard was designed to do one thing: make sure the child lived. And the most brutal truth of all is that the word in the title belongs to someone else entirely. The Apache trained their children to survive a world that was actively trying to kill them, and every practice on this list was an act of love, measured in the only currency that mattered: whether the child was still breathing at the end of it. The people who called those practices savage then took those same children and did the one thing no Apache parent ever did. They tried to make them into someone else. That is the number one truth. And now you know whose brutality the title was really about. So why did the legend survive and not the truth? 3 forces built the LIE. First, the Army dispatches. Officers like General Nelson Miles needed the Apache to be savages in order to justify the campaigns, the expense, the enormous body count on both sides. The official reports sent back to Washington used language designed to terrify Congress into funding the next column of soldiers and the next string of forts. Meanwhile, in private letters that were never meant for publication, men like General George Crook expressed grudging admiration for Apache endurance and tactical skill that bordered on open awe. The public version and the private version were 2 different stories told by the same men. Second, the newspapers and the dime novelists who reduced the entire complexity of Apache life to scalps and war cries because that version sold copies and the truth did not. An Apache child learning to identify 40 species of edible plants by age 7 does not sell a single newspaper. An Apache raid on a stagecoach does. They chose the raid every single time. And third, Hollywood. A full century of Western films filled with nameless Apache figures falling off horses in the dust. No names, no families, no grandmothers, no children. And the erasure was not a mistake or an oversight. It was the whole point. The moment you put an Apache child on the screen, you have to show the grandmother teaching the child to run. You have to show the 4-day ceremony honoring a girl. You have to show the system. And the moment you show the system, you can no longer pretend these were savages, so they never showed the child at all. The Apache system of raising children was not brutal. It was precise. It was the answer a people had built over centuries to one question: how do we make sure our children survive? And the answer worked, until the world it was designed for was taken away by force. Any parent listening knows the feeling underneath these truths. The terror that your child will face a world you cannot control, and the drive to prepare them anyway. The Apache answered that terror with more honesty than most of us can bear. That is the truth the movies never showed you.